The Pacific, 1942. Across the blue expanse of ocean, American radio waves bled into enemy hands. Every coded transmission, every whispered plan, intercepted, deciphered, and turned against its sender. Japan's cryptographers were among the best in the world. They had cracked every major Allied code in the Pacific theater. By the time U.S. forces launched operations in the Philippines and Guadalcanal, Tokyo often knew their moves before they happened. Communications officers were desperate. Cipher machines like the M209 were slow, cumbersome, and easily compromised. Field radios, the lifeline of a battle, became a double-edged sword. Messages took half an hour to encode and decode, while Japanese gunners struck within minutes. On paper, America had the numbers, the industry, and the firepower. But in the invisible war of information, Japan had the upper hand. In February 1942, in a small Marine Corps office in Camp Elliott, California, a World War I veteran named Philip Johnston walked in with an idea that sounded almost absurd. Johnston, the son of missionaries, had grown up among the Navajo Nation in Arizona. He spoke their language fluently, a language so complex, so phonetically alien, that even trained linguists struggled to learn it. It had no written alphabet, no standardized grammar, and was spoken by fewer than 30,000 people on Earth. When Johnston proposed using it as a code, Marine officers were skeptical. One major reportedly asked, "How can we trust a code that isn't even written down?" But Johnston persisted. "That's exactly why you can trust it," he replied. "It can't be written, it can't be learned, and it can't be broken." The Marines decided to test him. That spring, they brought in 4 Navajo men from a nearby reservation. The officers dictated a standard military message in English, coordinates, platoon movements, supply requests, and asked the Navajo to encode it, transmit it, and then decode it again. Within 20 seconds, the message came back perfectly intact. A similar message, sent through the U.S. Army's top cipher machine, took 30 minutes. The room fell silent. One officer simply said, "Get me more Navajos." In April 1942, the Marine Corps formally recruited 29 Navajo code talkers. They were young, most barely out of high school. They trained at Camp Pendleton, learning both military radio procedure and the art of translation. Their mission was twofold: invent a spoken code based on Navajo and make it fast enough for real combat. They began with an ingenious system. Every letter of the English alphabet was assigned a Navajo word. For example, A became Wolachi, and B became shush, bear, C became Mawasi, cat. Then came entire phrases. Submarine was Beshlo, iron fish. Tank became Che Dagahi, or turtle. Bomber plane was J-Show, buzzard. It was a code built from imagery, rhythm, and sound, as poetic as it was practical. The Marine Corps sent them into action before anyone else could even understand what they were doing. In August 1942, at Guadalcanal, the first code talkers joined the 1st Marine Division. Amid the jungle heat, gunfire, and chaos, they sat hunched over radios, speaking in a tongue that even fellow Marines couldn't comprehend. One of them later recalled, "The Japanese could hear us, but to them, it sounded like we were singing." Within weeks, word spread through the Pacific. The enemy can't touch our code. For the first time, American messages moved faster than Japanese bullets. The irony was unmistakable. Just decades earlier, the U.S. government had banned the Navajo language in schools, punishing Native children for speaking it. Now, in the crucible of war, that same language had become America's most powerful weapon. As one young code talker wrote home to his family in New Mexico, "They once told us to forget our words. Now they say our words are saving lives." The experiment had worked, beyond anyone's expectation. But in the battles to come, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, their voices would carry more than coded messages. They would carry the fate of entire divisions. By late 1942, the war in the Pacific had turned into a brutal test of endurance. From the jungles of Guadalcanal to the volcanic ridges of Tarawa, communication meant survival. Orders traveled through crackling radios, where seconds could decide life or death. In the midst of that chaos, a strange new sound began to hum across Marine frequencies, a rhythmic, melodic language unlike anything the enemy had ever heard. To American ears, it was alien. To Japanese cryptographers, it was maddening. To the men using it, it was home. It was the sound of Navajo. The first Navajo code talkers were assigned to the 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions. Their job was simple in theory: transmit coded messages faster than any machine with 0 errors. But their presence on the front lines made them soldiers first, code operators second. Private Chester Nez, one of the original 29, later recalled crouching behind sandbags as mortars screamed overhead. "We didn't have time to think," he said. "We just talked, fast, faster than fear." The messages they sent were unlike any before in warfare. A few short bursts, 10, 20 seconds at most, carried coordinates for artillery strikes, requests for reinforcements, or desperate calls for evacuation. What once took half an hour through ciphers now took less than a minute. And every word was unbreakable. At first, the code talkers faced suspicion from their own side. Their dark hair, their language, and their quiet presence drew mistrust from some white Marines. A few were even mistaken for Japanese soldiers and nearly shot. But when the first waves hit the beaches of Bougainville and Tarawa, prejudice gave way to awe. The code talkers' transmissions brought down precise bombardments, redirected lost platoons, and saved entire companies from ambushes. The system was flawless. Not one error, not one compromised message. A Marine corporal once said after a firefight, "I don't know what language that was, but it kept us alive." As the war expanded, so did the code. From the original 29, more than 400 Navajo code talkers would serve by 1944. They carried radios through swamps, deserts, and mountains, their voices weaving an invisible net across the Pacific. Their words guided aircraft at Guadalcanal, landed tanks at Saipan, and coordinated amphibious assaults across Okinawa. They used no codebooks, no notes, no machines, only memory. Each man memorized over 600 terms and improvised new ones on the spot. For fighter plane, they said dahe tai hai, hummingbird. For battleship, lo tso, whale. For Germany, beshbi cha he, iron hat. It was a language of imagery, born from the land, now turned into a weapon of war. In bunkers and jungle outposts, Japanese intelligence officers grew obsessed. They captured radios, recorded transmissions, even interrogated Navajo prisoners of war. But no one could make sense of it. The Japanese cryptographic section, which had cracked every British and American cipher used before, issued a single frustrated report. "This code is not a code. It is a language we cannot understand." It was the only Allied system Japan never broke. By 1944, the Navajo voices were everywhere, carried on the wind of every battle. To their commanders, they were invisible heroes. To their enemies, ghosts. But to each other, they were brothers, bound by words their ancestors had spoken long before any war. One veteran later said, "We didn't fight with guns alone. We fought with our language, something they tried to take from us, and we gave it back in the form of victory." The language of the Navajo had become a fortress of sound, protecting men, missions, and entire divisions. And in the battles still to come, at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, that fortress would face its ultimate test. February 19th, 1945, Iwo Jima, an island of black volcanic ash, barely 8 square miles wide, yet destined to become one of the bloodiest battlefields in the Pacific. When the first waves of Marines hit the beaches that morning, the air was thick with smoke and sulfur. The Japanese had turned the island into a fortress of tunnels, artillery, and hidden guns. Every radio call mattered. Every second could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. In the heart of that chaos, the Navajo code talkers went to work. Private Joe Hosteen, Kelwood adjusted his headset inside a shell crater, sand and dust raining down with every blast. Around him, wounded men shouted for corpsmen while tanks struggled to move through the ash. Through the crackle of his radio came a voice in Navajo, rapid, melodic, calm. It was a fellow code talker relaying coordinates for a Japanese bunker on Mount Suribachi. Within minutes, American artillery answered with thunder. "We'd send a message," Kelwood said later, "and the shells would fall right where we asked. No mistakes." For 2 days straight, the code talkers operated under constant fire, transmitting hundreds of messages across the beaches and up the slopes. Everyone was flawless. At the height of the fighting, 6 Navajo code talkers of the 5th Marine Division handled communications for the entire assault. In just 48 hours, they sent and received over 800 messages, without a single error. Lieutenant Colonel Howard Connor, their commanding officer, later said, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." Elsewhere on the island, another team crawled through wrecked pillboxes with their radios on their backs. The enemy's artillery zeroed in on radio signals, so the code talkers had to move constantly, whispering into microphones even as shrapnel burst nearby. The words they spoke were simple, direct, alive with rhythm. Turtle to iron fish, move forward, enemy at 2 o'clock. Every sound, every syllable was a lifeline. To Japanese intelligence, those same words were maddening. Intercepts poured into listening stations in Tokyo, but linguists could find no pattern, no syntax, no root. They analyzed hours of recorded transmissions, thinking it might be a mixture of Chinese, Mongolian, or even coded English. But it wasn't. It was the heartbeat of a people, ancient, unbroken, and untranslatable. By the time the American flag rose over Mount Suribachi, Iwo Jima had cost more than 26,000 American casualties, including nearly 7,000 dead. But the Navajo code talkers, those quiet voices on the radio, had kept entire battalions alive through precision and speed. Not one of their messages had ever been cracked. When the battle was over, Marines across the island shook their hands, some realizing for the first time who these men were. One sergeant said, "You saved my boys. I don't understand a damn word you said, but I thank you." As the war neared its end, the code talkers carried their radios through Okinawa and beyond. They had become living code machines, trusted with secrets no cipher could match. They never failed. They never broke. And when the guns finally fell silent in 1945, their voices, the most powerful code in the Pacific, were ordered to go silent too. The code remained classified for more than 2 decades. Their story for a time would vanish into the dust of history, their language once again forgotten by the very nation it had saved. When the guns fell silent in August 1945, the Pacific was a wasteland of ash and silence. The war that had begun with surprise at Pearl Harbor ended with fire over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Across that arc of islands, among the Marines packing their gear for home, were the Navajo code talkers, men whose voices had carried victory through chaos. But as they boarded ships for San Diego, there were no parades, no headlines, no medals. Their mission was still classified. The code that had saved thousands of lives was to remain a secret. "Forget everything you did," their officers told them. "You were never here." And just like that, their words, the most unbreakable code of the war, vanished into official silence. Back home, they returned not as heroes, but as strangers. Many stepped off trains in Arizona and New Mexico wearing Marine uniforms, only to be met by segregation and suspicion. A few went back to the reservations, to sheep ranches and small farms, carrying invisible scars and the weight of a story they were forbidden to tell. One veteran recalled, "They said we were heroes, but we couldn't even buy a beer in town." Still, the code lived on in their memories, perfect, intact, unbroken. For the next 2 decades, America forgot them. In classrooms, the Navajo language was still forbidden. In military archives, their contribution remained buried under top-secret stamps. Even among their families, the truth stayed locked behind silence. Until 1968. That year, the U.S. military finally declassified the Navajo Code Talker program. Historians began to piece together the story of how a language, once nearly erased by government policy, had become one of the most effective weapons in modern warfare. The revelation stunned the nation. General after general testified that the code had never been broken, not once. Scholars who examined the system called it a masterpiece of simplicity and genius. Recognition came slowly. In 1982, President Ronald Reagan declared August 14th, National Navajo Code Talkers Day. And in 2001, more than half a century after they had risked their lives on the front lines, the original 29 received the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor the United States can give. By then, many were gone, but those who remained stood proudly in Washington, D.C., medals gleaming under the same flag they had helped defend. When asked how it felt, one of them, Samuel Sandoval, simply said, I'm proud, not for myself, but for my people. Our language protected this country when it needed us most. Today, their legacy endures not only in military museums, but in the classrooms of the Navajo Nation, where young students now learn the very language once banned by law. Their words, once whispered through battle smoke, are now spoken in songs, stories, and ceremonies. And somewhere in that rhythm, the pulse of syllables that carried coordinates and hope, lies the essence of what the code talkers achieved. They turned culture into strength, language into armor, and identity into victory. In the end, the Japanese never broke the Navajo code, but the Navajo broke something far greater, the idea that one people's words could ever be less powerful than another's. Our language was meant to live, said one veteran, and through the war, it did.